Hello, Pittsburghers. My name is Wynn Calland, and I grew up in Pittsburgh many, many years ago. This is a story about my love affair with the city and with my train set and with sports in general in the Pittsburgh area. When I was 5 years old, my dad gave me a box for Christmas. And he gave me this box, and it was the only thing I got for Christmas. And I didn't know what was in it. And when I opened the box up, it was a brand new Lionel train O-gauge, the big kind, not the little HOs, but the big kind. And I just was so starstruck I couldn't believe it. I don't think he knew that I was going to have quite the reaction I had, but I did. I just loved it. And this train right in the front here is the original train that my dad gave me 66 years ago, or 60 years ago. And and it still works, and it's just one of the greatest things that I've treasured all these years. So I grew up in Pittsburgh after second grade, and we came basically to Pittsburgh from New York. And it's a great story on that day and that month that we came here. We came here in 1960, about a month after Mazeroski hit the home run that won the 1960 World Series. And yes, I said we lived in New York, in Westchester County, which is right out of New York City. And so I remember that day, I got off the bus about 3:30 in the afternoon. And I got off the bus and I went home and turned on the TV, and I was able to turn it on just in time to see Mazeroski hit that home run over the left field wall. And I was devastated. And I was a great Yankee fan in those days. And little did I know that, that the city that I would move to, who were the victors then, would turn out to be just one of the greatest things that ever happened to me. We moved to Pittsburgh maybe a month or two after that. And I still remember walking down. We moved to Mount Lebanon in the South Hills. And I remember moving there and walking down the street in Mount Lebanon up in Washington Road. And a lot of traffic, and the city was dirty then. And I walked down that street, and there was still confetti around, and there was still stuff in the ground and in the sewers and stuff. And I thought to myself, boy, what have we moved to? Over the course of the next years, I went to school there, and in my growing-up years in Mount Lebanon, went to Mount Lebanon High School, was able to play on the championship team in 1971. Just had a great time in Pittsburgh, and of course the 70s were the great years with all the great Steeler teams, with also the Pirates in 79 and 71. Penguins in those years started to play very good hockey, and I was there for Stanley Cup championships in the 90s. It was just a great town to grow up in. And so what I wanted to do here, I'm going to explain to you what this train layout is, but as you can see, this is basically a model of downtown Pittsburgh. Now, it's not a professional model. I mean, I didn't take a picture or a photograph and try to emulate exactly what was in the photograph, because, as I'll explain later, all of the things you see here were given to me as gifts. And I've hauled them around in my life for the last 60 years, and I've never had a place before that I could display all of my gifts and all of the things that I have in Steeler Village here. And so finally, I moved to Dallas, Texas. We're here basically retired, and I'm here because our daughter is a veterinarian here, and she moved here about 5 years ago, and we wanted to come down here and be with our family as her family and our grandkids were being born and raised. So that's why we're here in Dallas. And we live in actually a little town called Keller, north of Fort Worth. I'm standing here in the middle, broadcasting to you from the middle of the Ohio River, believe it or not. And of course, any of you guys, you know all the layout, and you know that Mount Washington behind me, and you know that the stadium areas. And I have some unique things that, because of the collection of things that I had, I built this whole layout to contain everything that I had, so I could display almost everything that I'd saved for many, many years. So there will be some creative experience here with respect to things won't be exactly geographically the way they are. And of course, I have some railroad bridges and things that have to be placed here in order to have a train set, of course. But basically, the point, Mount Washington, the stadium areas, Ohio River, Monongahela, Allegheny. These are the things that I grew up with, and these are the things that I've themed this railroad set and this display after. So what I would like to do is talk a little bit about how I put this together, the theme of this, how it ties together, and then talk about a little bit about the construction, and then I'd like to show you just run the trains. Wanted to start by taking you around the display and just kind of showing you some of the details. But before I do that, I'd like to talk about the theme, the overall theme of this layout, because there is a basic theme, and I've had to integrate two different scales. Most of you probably know that the little trains, the little HO size trains, go along with these smaller tracks around here. And then the big trains, the Lionel O gauge, are the bigger ones that go around the outside. And so since I had a lot of different detail on both scales, I didn't want to leave one scale out and just to have one scale for a layout. And because this was my creative design, I took the creative liberty to make the layout the way I wanted it. So, and that's the beauty of being the author of these things, right? So you can do whatever you want to do. So you have to use your imagination a little bit. But so if you picture that all of the mountain behind me, all of the rivers, all of the bridges, all this stuff is the regular O scale, big Lionel train scale. And then I've moved over to here, just inside this little area here, which I call the Steeler Village. And so this would be akin to some of the stores that are down there near the casino, all the way down between the stadiums, things like that. So I've kind of gathered or was able to get all of these different pieces over the years that people gave me for birthdays and for Christmas and things like that. And so I decided that I was going to create a Steeler Village with a HO track around it that would just service the little village here. And so I've done that with the miniature or the HO Steeler trains, which I will show you. And then I also have a set of the Penguin trains and some of the Stanley Cup things that have recently occurred. What I decided to do is make it such that it would be some kind of a Indian summer day in, say, early November, middle November, something like that, where people are starting to think about some Christmas stuff, maybe right after Thanksgiving, possibly, something like that, that allowed me to then, say that basically we had had an early snow and it was melting and the day was kind of a beautiful Indian summer day. And so therefore, when we go through the point and show some of the boats and things like that, you'll see why that is. So the basic consideration was to be able to put two different scales in one display. And I don't know if you'll see many displays that have two different scales, because it's difficult to do that because things are so out of proportion. But so this display just centers on the HO scale and the village here, and then from the left of the stadiums, and then all the rest of this stuff is regular O scale. And so that's kind of the theme, and that's how this display was constructed. I wanted to give a little bit about the construction of this table and the display, because it's rather a unique thing if you haven't ever built a model train display. Believe it or not, there are a heck of a lot of engineering things that have to go into it, and by all means, this is not a professional display. And the professional modelers that do this for a living and really enjoy this, they build these things completely to scale and completely replica of the places that they're trying to model. So this is not this set. This set was my creation, and it was my feeling about what I wanted to build and how I wanted to build it. And so I actually started this with this plan, and I want to hold up this plan. This is the only plan that I had to start this with, and you can see it's fairly rudimentary. And that's the concept. And so what I did was I started from scratch, and I brought, first thing I did was bring the tables in. There are 3 tables. They're very heavy. They basically had to be carried by 4 guys to get up here and to fit in here. And so there's 3 separate tables bolted together in order to form this large platform. Then what I went about doing was starting to construct the tracks and try to figure out what I was going to do with the tracks. And so what was interesting about this was that I did not want just 2 circular O-gauge tracks. I wanted to be able to have 2 separate trains, O-gauge trains, because I had that many cars. But I also wanted to be different or separate a little bit. And so what I did was I decided to put a tiered approach for the tracks behind me. So you can see here that I've got a track elevated here under the mountaintop, and then I've got a base track down below. And so I have 1 train running one way and 1 train running the other way. And so that gives me ability to have two trains in a relatively small space. And it allows me to also have some interesting differences in construction, being able to have to put these on bridges and also on trestles as we move around. So you can see that there's a lot of trestle work in this in order to get the track stabilized and in order to allow it to be able to be used. Then next, of course, was to lay out how this all was going to come together. And so the first thing I had to do was figure out how big the mountain was going to be. And anybody who's done modeling, if you're looking to do things with model plaster and things like that, this mountain would be a tremendous undertaking to do, a very, very long and tedious and dusty process. And I didn't have an experience with that really, and I didn't want to mess with that, so I decided to think about something that would be easy to do, that would not be that messy. And so what I decided to do was to put chicken wire on a wood base. And so I basically put chicken wire, and this is all chicken wire under here, that's able to be formed, so you can form it to use the hill and show the hill. And so I took the chicken wire down through here and then bent it backwards and then under here, and then curved it around so that I could get the form I wanted. And of course, Mount Washington doesn't have anything cut out like this, in real life, but this is the poetic license I have with this. In order to get this elevated track, I needed to cut out the mountain. And so I needed to find a way to do that. And so I thought, well, how in the world am I going to do that with the chicken wire to make it look like it looks like a vein, like an ore, like the coal veins that Pittsburgh has in the mountains. And so I decided that, well, the one thing that looks like veins and ridges when you crumple it is aluminum foil. And so I took aluminum foil and I placed aluminum foil on this out here and then bent it back. And naturally, when you bend the aluminum foil back, it does make these veins automatically. And it was a phenomenal thing, to do. Because it looks terrific, when you look at it after it's spray painted, you can see that it actually looks like the veins that actually are in those mountains when they cut them out. And so that's what that construction is. And this is just a fabric that's over top of the chicken wire, of which is then sprayed with a little bit of adhesive. And then all of the fixtures that are on the mountaintop with the trees and all that stuff just can be glued on or can be punched through the fabric surface and tied in from the back. So that's how the mountain was constructed. Then I put the tracks in, and then the last big engineering feat were the bridges. And so I didn't realize when I started this how tedious a process it is to line up the bridges and to get them such that you would never have a derailment or a track that would or a car that would hit the edge of the bridge and knock everything out. And that was a lot of trial and error, and that took a lot of time. And so once I've got these perfectly aligned, then I put them down over top of the stanchions in the river and mounted them and secured them. And luckily, so far, I haven't had any issues with that, which is good. But the clearance, as you'll see when we run the trains, the clearance, between the bridges is very, very small. So you have to have it pretty much perfect, or else you're going to have major disasters when you run the train. So then the little hills I built were just more of the chicken wire, and what I did was I took some of that crack filler things that you do for attic sealing and things like that. Then I sprayed it into the chicken wire, and then I put then I just spray painted over top and put glue on the top, and then put the scenery and it comes out looking exactly like rocks and like a rocky terrain, which is great. So these are just kind of like things I tried. I didn't have any idea if it was going to work, and they all seemed to work pretty well. So I left it like that. And then I built a river. The rivers were pretty easy to construct. It's just basically outlining the point. And then these are domino tiles that line the river. And so that was pretty easy to do. That's a little tedious, of course, but when you have some time, you can do that. And so then so that's basically it for the construction part of this. It was a nice. It took me a long time. The whole display took me about a year and a half, working maybe, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 hours a week on it, maybe a little more than that. And but it was a great project, and I enjoyed the construction. So I'd like to show you now a little bit about each different part of this display, and just some funny things that I incorporated in just to have some unique fun with the display. So I started out, let's start out on this side. All the buildings that you see behind me, they are buildings that people have given me over the years, as I mentioned, and so I basically just put them on top of Mount Washington in no particular order, because obviously it's not going to be a replica of exactly what the stores are, up in the mountain. But I have Molly's Ice Cream Shop, and I've got the old Isley's, and the old Isley's building you can see here. Isley's was a great ice cream store when we were growing up, right next to our house. And they used to have the skyscraper ice cream cones, and those were one of the greatest things to have on a Sunday, Saturday afternoon, was to go up to Isley's and get one of those skyscraper cones. And so I was glad that I got an Isley's store, and got a cobbler shop and a bunch of other things. So that's basically the mountain. On top of the mountain is those. I also wanted to point out that I was able to go to Pittsburgh and see in the Duquesne incline to get the model little incline cars, and so that's obviously a model of the Duquesne incline, which is great to have. And so I built the point here, and again, as I mentioned, this is a day in late November, a very, very warm day, Indian summer, and so we've got a bunch of people enjoying the point. They just put the Christmas tree up for the holiday season, and so we've got a mixture of things here, a little snow on the bushes, and basically just people enjoying themselves. A couple canoeists here, and then I wanted to. Oh, I got a tug and tow here that I made out of Legos with rocks and all. Got a Tudor house over here that I needed to put in, and so we've got a boat, and he's on the riverbank. Okay, so over here we have a ferry boat that ferries people, obviously back and forth from one side to the other for the games and all. And I made this boat out of a CPAP mask humidifier chamber, and the top just comes right off, the pieces separate, and what I did was I put some benches and people inside, and so I really didn't have to build anything or buy anything or anything like that, because I thought that was kind of unique. It looks pretty much like a ferry boat, and again, I wanted to be able to use some things that I had, so I thought that was interesting to make that. I also, I know that we've got a sub tied up down on the river, and so I found a little model sub, and I made the Steeler emblem and made him black and gold. And he's out for just a little excursion, obviously, on the river. So I had a farmhouse that was given to me with a bunch of animals and a corral and things like that, so I included that in the site here. And the story with this one is that this gentleman actually owned all this land before the city annexed it and bought it. And so he's left now relegated to the edge of the property right next to the river and the bridges. And this is his property. And this is the gentleman right here. And he's out standing in front with his rifle. and he's talking to the postman who's trying to deliver a package to him, and he's having none of it because he's trying to protect his area against everybody who he thinks is trying to take over his land. So that's kind of the little backside theme of what that area is. In front of me here is the stadium, which is the PNC Park Stadium, and this one was given to me as a present a few years ago, and so I integrated this into the display, and as you can see, it's a pretty much a good rendition of what PNC Park is and the view you can see going across the river into the city. And I've been at this stadium many times, taken in many games, and it brings me back also to a memory of a time way back when I was going to Forbes Field in the old days, and Dad used to drop us, my brother and I, off at the game at the double headers on Sunday afternoon, and I think in those days you could get into those double headers for like $5 or something like that, and spend all day at the ballpark, and we did that a lot. And I remember early in the days when I used to do that, late at night one night. I had one of the programs, and in those days the programs had regular paper pages, but there were like maybe 2 or 3 pages in the program that were glossy type pages, and those made the best airplanes. Well, you could fly those things for miles. And we always used to sit up in the top right field stands of Forbes Field, and so one day I was up in the stands and I grabbed one of those pieces of paper and I made a paper airplane, and I just let it go. And of course the winds were blowing from right field, and it just took that plane and it just sailed and sailed and sailed, and it went all the way and hit Mazeroski, who was playing second base, in the back. And I got a standing ovation from the crowd, and Maz turned around and couldn't figure out what all the hoopla was about, and he bent down and picked it up and crumbled it up and put it in his pocket. And so that was my claim to fame for my connection with Bill Mazeroski after all those years. So it's always been the baseball and the Pirates have always been very special to me, and followed them with Willie Stargell. And I remember the other thing that was truly tremendous was being in the right field stands and being close to Roberto Clemente and watching him many times throw out runners going from first to third on a single, or trying to stretch a double into a triple, and throwing people out from a rocket shot at the right field wall all the way to third base without hitting the ground. Just line drive throws. He was a phenomenal athlete, and I was very privileged to have been able to see him and Willie Stargell, Clendenin, Hebner, all those guys. It was a great time to grow up in Pittsburgh. It really was. So the stadium it's a neat story. So I wanted to point out that this stadium is a replica of Heinz Field that was built by my son. He gave this to me 2 years ago at Christmas, and he did all the detail work of this, put these thousands and thousands of Lego pieces together with the people in the stands, and built the field, and he manufactured all that, put the logos in, and put the little wind socks on the goalposts. Everything is pretty much a replica of the way it is, and he gave this to me 2 years ago for Christmas. One of the most cherished parts of my whole train set is this stadium, and I really display it very proudly. And it's truly a great present for me. And he shipped this in about 4 or 5 pieces, and then spent a couple days before Christmas putting it together for me and surprised me on Christmas morning with it. And it's been truly just a phenomenal gift and a very special remembrance for me. So moving on, we've got the Steeler Village now from this side. And again, these are the pieces that I've put together over the years. And around in this side of the Steeler Village is a trestle that allows people to come from the stadium over the track. And I put the Stanley Cup from 2016 up here. And that trestle was made out of ladders, just basically ladders that are model ladders. And I took them and glued them all together and made a trestle out of that so that people could walk across. And I thought, well, that was pretty unique. One of the things also I included for fun was an accident that that happened just right at game time. And so I included a traffic scene where the cars have run into each other, and I've got a policeman, an ambulance, and a fire truck, and a tow truck, and a group of bystanders that are standing around looking at trying to determine who was at fault. And the two drivers are over here in the corner, and they are yelling at each other. One's got his arms on his hips and the other hands on his hips, and the other one's got his hands in the air, and they're obviously having a vigorous discussion of who was at fault. And I thought I'd just include that for a little bit of fun. We've got a Steeler bus full of people that are traveling outside from around the outside of the stores and back to the stadium area. And then I got a Steeler car over here that you can see, and I've also got a Steeler gas station in the corner back here, and then I've got a Steeler water tower for the water necessary for the different establishments and the businesses. And a train station over here that's where the small train, the HO train, will come over and will let people on and off so that they can move around the village. This train back here is a static train. It's designed for just display, and I put some of the important cars, the Clark Bar car, of course, which is a Steeler tradition and a Pittsburgh tradition, and then of course the Camel, the old Camel cars. This Army car here with the missile was one of the original cars that my dad gave me on that first train I mentioned to you, which was the diesel Navy train. And then, of course, the Steeler boxcar. The satellite, and that's the Super Bowl replica from the Super Bowl, and I don't remember which one, but it's you can see it's a Super Bowl car. And then the Lionel train with the satellite, the green car, was also one of the first ones that I received in that first set. And then, of course, we've got the bridges down here on the other side, and we end up then again back to across the Ohio and where the cable cars are. So that's kind of the story, the specific story of integrating some of these special features that I had with this layout. So I wanted to explain and describe exactly the difference between, as I mentioned before, we have the O scale, which is the big Lionel trains, and the HO scale, which is the smaller ones. And so here is the pictures of the Steeler train that I have that's now circling around the Steeler village itself, dropping off passengers in the different areas of the village. And then I've got a similar train, what's a Penguin train, and that train is on the siding over here. And it, as you can see, has a Stanley Cup display for 2016 and 2017. Here, the 2017 one, I think, is on the bridge, on the trestle. And so you can see that the two scales directly in the layout. And I wanted to just to show how the difference in the sizes of them for those that aren't familiar with that kind of scale change. Yeah, so this is the diesel engine train that my dad brought me, as I mentioned earlier, and it has United States Navy train. I added a couple of the blue cars, the missile cars, that weren't in the original train just because of the consistent color and because of the military applications. But that engine is 60 years old and has never stopped running, has never not worked. It's really the workhorse of all of the cars I have. Okay, so my other train besides the diesel train is my locomotive train, and the locomotive has an interesting story also. This locomotive I got from a place in a little small town outside of Kansas City. We were having a Maple Leaf Festival in the fall, and we were going to hear an Irish group sing. And we were waiting for the show to begin, and we walked into the little town that was hosting this Irish group for a festival. And we were just wasting time, and we walked into the general little store. It's a little store in Missouri across the border. And walked in there, and there's this display of this engine and the coal car and a bunch of other cars. and it was like laying in the middle of this table, and it was for sale, and it was for like, you know, really cheap price. And I wondered what in the world was wrong with it, and I walked up, and there, on the tape on the side of the engine was a sign that said it doesn't work. And so I said, I wonder why it wouldn't work. But you know, I decided, well, you know, I needed a second locomotive, so I just picked it up for basically nothing. And when I took it home and I took a look at it, the only thing that was wrong with it was the fact that the front little wheels here that guide the engine when it's on the track, they had dropped, apparently had dropped the engine, and it had bent the wheel. And so it wouldn't run on the track, obviously. And so all I did was take a pair of pliers and straighten it out, and it's worked ever since for many, many years. So it's kind of a neat story. But so one of the unique things about having your own display is you can do whatever it is you want to do. And one of the things that I wanted to do that I think is very unique is I wanted to have a train that had graffiti on it. And I wanted to, because all the trains that we see, you know, the freight trains and things like that have graffiti on them. And so I thought, well, I have never seen a display that had graffiti on it before, so I decided I wanted to have graffiti, so I needed to figure out how to do that. And it just so happens that my sister-in-law, Marty Crowley, is a graphic artist. And so she agreed, I sent 4 of these cars to Los Angeles, and she agreed to go down to the tracks in LA and to kind of copy some of the graffiti that was on those trains, and then to paint my cars with the graffiti. So if you can see here, we have the different type of graffiti that she saw on some of the different box cars, and she basically put a frame by frame of some of the graffiti that she saw on those cars, and boy, she did a fabulous job. And within these little drawings, there are certain things that she's included about herself personally and her life story, and I'm not going to obviously go through all that, but she's put her personal touch on these cars, and I now have a train that has graffiti on it, which I wanted all my life. All right, so I'm going to start the Steeler train just to show you the operation, and it's just going to go around in a circle and carry the passengers. And this is pretty much a standard HO layout. And the one thing, the difference between the HO and the O gauge is that, you know, the HO, they're pretty much slower. They're not quite as exciting, I don't think, to work on as the others. And generally speaking, they kind of just, you know, chug along. And I think they're mainly more for scenic and for show purposes. I like to operate the O gauge because they're much bigger and I think more exciting. Now the one thing about these trains and this train setup is that you have to drive this train. You cannot just set it down and let it do its thing, because you're going to have momentum coming down the hills. You've got areas of the track that you need to be careful of so it doesn't derail. And so I'm constantly driving this train because I know where the areas are. And so that's what a locomotive engineer does, is going to have to drive these trains around the different passes, the different curves. He's got to slow the trains down when he operates them. He's got to know his track. All right. As you can hear, the diesel's winding down. It has its smoke coming from liquid that comes in out of the stack. And then this particular train, I put in, these are not make-believe like stones and make-believe coal and presents and, you know, all the packages and stuff that's in there. Those are actual products that are actual stone and actual wood and all that stuff. So this little guy, he needs a little help to get going when he gets up that first hill. And but after that, he's good. And he's a real workhorse. And so you'll see that he's chugging when we're operating him. So I got to give him a little help, and then he gets rolling. And it's smoking. You see him smoking? And then he chugs up the hill. And you have to drive this train also. And that's fun because you don't just to sit and watch it, you get to operate it. And you can speed up a little bit if you want. He's chugging, look at him chugging up the hill there. Hope you've enjoyed looking at my train set. It was dedicated to you guys in Pittsburgh. It's dedicated to Pittsburgh sports, dedicated to my father. Just something that I wanted to do for fun, and I hope you've enjoyed seeing a little bit of Pittsburgh down in Dallas. Thanks.